The powerful CEO humiliated her, until a DNA test revealed the truth he never expected. Hello, let's hear another incredible story. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. I love narrating stories for you, so get ready. Let's start. The courthouse steps felt colder than the October morning warranted. Naomi Ellison clutched her worn leather purse, the same one she'd carried through 2 years of sleepless nights, doctor visits, and moments when she wondered if she was strong enough to raise a child alone. Today, that purse held the most important document of her life, a court-ordered paternity test that would either vindicate her or destroy what remained of her carefully rebuilt world. "Mama, up!" 2-year-old Oliver tugged at her coat, his chubby fingers sticky from the graham crackers she'd given him during the taxi ride. His dark hair, so achingly similar to his father's, caught the morning light as he reached toward her with complete trust. The same trust she'd been forced to learn when no one else believed her story. Naomi lifted him into her arms, feeling his warm weight against her chest. Oliver smelled like baby shampoo and innocence, a stark contrast to the legal battlefield she was about to enter. "We're going inside now, sweetheart. Remember what Mommy told you about staying quiet?" Oliver nodded solemnly, his grey eyes, another painful reminder, studying her face with the intuitive concern only children possessed. At 2E, he couldn't understand why strange people wanted to ask questions about his daddy, but he sensed his mother's anxiety like a small animal sensing a storm. The courthouse lobby buzzed with the controlled chaos of legal proceedings. Lawyers in expensive suits hurried past families torn apart by custody battles, their heels clicking against marble floors that had witnessed countless broken hearts. Naomi found herself scanning the crowd, searching for the face that had haunted her dreams and nightmares for over 3 years. "Miss Ellison?" A gentle voice belonged to Rebecca Torres, the court-appointed mediator. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair pulled into a practical bun. "Are you ready?" "Ready." The word felt hollow. How could anyone be ready to face the man who had dismissed her so cruelly? The man who had called her a liar when she'd gathered the courage to tell him about the pregnancy. The man whose parents had tried to paint her as a gold-digging opportunist seeking to trap their precious son. But looking at Oliver, who was now playing with the zipper of her jacket, completely unaware that his entire future hung in the balance, Naomi found her resolve. She had been ready the moment she'd chosen to keep him, to love him, to build a life for them both when everyone else had abandoned her. "Yes," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "We're ready." The conference room smelled like coffee and legal documents. Through the tall windows, downtown Portland stretched out in all its autumn glory, but Naomi barely noticed the view. Her attention was fixed on the doorway, waiting for the moment that would change everything. When Grayson Whitmore walked in, the room seemed to shrink. He was exactly as she remembered, tall, commanding, with those piercing grey eyes that had once looked at her with desire and later with contempt. His dark suit was perfectly tailored, his presence filling the space like he owned it, which, given his family's influence in the city, he probably did. But there was something different about him now, lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. A tension in his shoulders that spoke of sleepless nights and heavy burdens. For a moment, just a moment, he looked almost vulnerable. Then his gaze fell on Oliver, and Naomi watched as Grayson Whitmore's carefully constructed world tilted on its axis. The boy looked up from his toy car, drawn by some invisible instinct to study the stranger. Father and son regarded each other in silence, 2 pairs of identical grey eyes meeting across a chasm of hurt and time. Oliver tilted his head with characteristic curiosity, while Grayson's face went pale beneath his tan. "Jesus," Grayson whispered, the word escaping before he could stop it. Rebecca cleared her throat diplomatically. "Mr. Whitmore, Miss Ellison, please take your seats. We have the test results." The manila envelope sat on the table like a loaded weapon. Naomi's hands trembled as she adjusted Oliver on her lap, trying to shield him from the tension crackling through the room. Her son was playing with his car, making soft, vroom sounds that seemed impossibly loud in the silence. "The results are conclusive," Rebecca began, her professional voice cutting through the atmosphere. "Mr. Whitmore, you are the biological father of Oliver James Ellison with a 99.97% probability." The words hung in the air like a verdict. Naomi felt a mixture of vindication and terror wash over her. She had known, had always known, but hearing it confirmed felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. Everything would change now. The quiet life she'd built for Oliver, the careful routines that had kept them safe, the walls she'd erected around her heart, all of it was about to crumble. Grayson stared at the document as if it might change if he looked long enough. His hands, usually so steady in boardroom negotiations, shook slightly as he reached for the paper. How is this possible? The timing is exactly right," Naomi said quietly, finding her voice at last. November 15th, 2021, the business conference at the Heathman Hotel, room 412. She watched recognition dawn on his face, followed quickly by something that looked like regret. He remembered. Of course he remembered. One didn't forget a night like that, no matter how much they might want to. Oliver chose that moment to drop his car, which clattered across the table toward Grayson. The sound broke the spell, and instinctively, Grayson reached out to catch it. His fingers brushed against Oliver's as he handed it back, and Naomi saw her son's face light up with the simple joy of a small kindness. "Thank you," Oliver said, in his clear, sweet voice, his first words to his father. Grayson's breath caught, You're welcome." And in that moment, looking at this powerful man rendered speechless by a toddler's smile, Naomi realized that nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be simple again. The coffee in Grayson's hands had gone cold 20 minutes ago, but he couldn't bring himself to put the cup down. His corner office on the 42nd floor of the Whitmore Financial Building usually felt like a throne room. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Columbia River, mahogany desk inherited from his grandfather, walls lined with awards and photographs documenting 3 generations of business success. Today, it felt like a prison. The paternity test results lay spread across his desk like evidence of a crime. 99.97%. The number burned in his mind, each digit a nail in the coffin of the man he thought he was. How had he been so wrong? How had he looked into Naomi's eyes 3 years ago and seen deception instead of truth? His phone buzzed for the 15th time. News traveled fast in Portland's elite circles, and the courthouse had been full of sharp eyes and sharper tongues. His assistant had been fielding calls all morning, investors, board members, society columnists who smelled blood in the water. Mr. Whitmore, Linda Chen, his assistant of 8 years, appeared in the doorway with the cautious expression she wore when delivering bad news. "Oh dear, your mother is here." Before Grayson could respond, Margaret Whitmore swept past Linda with the imperious grace of a woman who had never heard the word no. At 63, she remained formidable. Silver hair perfectly coiffed, Chanel suit without a wrinkle, diamonds that caught the light like warnings. "Grayson." Her voice could have cut glass. "We need to talk." Linda retreated quickly, closing the door behind her with a soft click that felt like the sound of a trap snapping shut. Margaret approached his desk with measured steps, her eyes taking in the scattered documents. "So it's true. The test confirms what that woman has been claiming. Her name is Naomi," Grayson said quietly. "And yes, it's true." His mother's laugh was bitter. "Naomi, how quaint. I suppose you think this changes everything." Grayson stood, moving to the window. Below, the city bustled with ordinary people living ordinary lives. People who didn't have to worry about family legacies or stock prices or the weight of generations of expectation. "It changes the fact that I have a son I didn't know existed." "You have a complication," Margaret corrected sharply, "one that threatens everything your father and grandfather built. Do you have any idea what the board is saying? What the investors are thinking?" The image of Oliver's trusting grey eyes flashed in Grayson's mind, the way the boy had thanked him for such a simple gesture. His son, The words still felt foreign, impossible. "I remember her," he said suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. Margaret's expression hardened. "What?" "From that night. I remember everything." He turned from the window, facing his mother's cold gaze. She wasn't some random woman trying to trap me. She was brilliant, a financial analyst presenting at the conference. We talked for hours about market trends, economic policy. She challenged every assumption I made. The memory came flooding back with painful clarity. Naomi in that navy dress, her hair falling in loose waves around her shoulders. The way she'd laughed at his jokes, the intelligence that sparkled in her dark eyes. The connection he'd felt, real and electric and terrifying in its intensity. And then what happened? Margaret's voice was arctic. "You bedded her and decided it was a mistake." Grayson flinched. "I was engaged to Vivian. I was supposed to propose the following weekend." "Supposed to, but you didn't, did you?" Margaret's smile was razor thin. "You called off that engagement, threw away a perfectly suitable match. And for what? To mope around for months, like a lovesick teenager." The accusation hit its mark. Grayson had called off his engagement to Vivian Blackstone, though he'd never admitted, even to himself, that it was because of one night with a woman whose last name he hadn't even known. He'd told himself it was about compatibility, about not being ready. He'd buried himself in work, built higher walls, convinced himself he was better off alone. "That when she came to me about the pregnancy," he continued, his voice growing stronger, "I was scared, terrified. So I did what I always do. I pushed her away. I made her the villain instead of facing what I'd done." "What you'd done?" Margaret's voice rose. "You had a moment of weakness. Men do. It doesn't make you responsible for every consequence. It makes me responsible for my son." The words hung between them, and Grayson felt something shift in his chest. "My son." Each repetition made it more real, more undeniable. Margaret's composure cracked slightly. "You don't know anything about being a father. You don't know anything about children. This woman has raised him for 2 years without you. Clearly she's managing fine." "She's managing alone," Grayson corrected. "There's a difference." Through the glass walls of his office, he could see the newsroom of a local business channel. Their stock ticker was running at the bottom of the screen, and he caught sight of his own company's symbol. Whitmore Financial was down 3 points since the morning, a subtle but telling reaction to the whispers already circulating. His phone rang, the sharp sound cutting through the tension. Linda's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Whitmore, it's Judge Patterson's office. They want to schedule a follow-up hearing about custody arrangements." Custody. The word sent a chill through him. He thought of Oliver's small hand touching his fingers, the way the boy had looked at him with such open curiosity. What did he know about custody? About bedtime stories and scraped knees and the 1,000 small moments that made up a childhood? What did he know about love? Margaret moved closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Listen to me carefully, Grayson. This doesn't have to destroy everything. We can make this go away quietly. A generous settlement, a non-disclosure agreement. The woman gets financial security, you get to maintain your reputation, and everyone moves on with their lives. And my son will be better off without the chaos of a custody battle splashed across every newspaper in the state." Margaret's eyes were hard as diamonds. "You want to help him. Give him a stable life with his mother and a trust fund that will ensure his future. Don't drag him into this world of obligations and expectations before he's old enough to understand what it means." Grayson stared at his mother, seeing her clearly perhaps for the first time. This was how she saw love, as obligation, expectation, something to be managed and controlled. This was how she'd raised him, how 3 generations of Whitmore men had been shaped into cold, efficient machines. But Oliver's smile hadn't been cold, and Naomi's pain, when she'd looked at him in that courthouse, had been anything but efficient. "Schedule the hearing," he said quietly. Margaret's face went white. "Grayson, schedule it," he repeated, his voice growing stronger. "I want to know my son." For the first time in his adult life, Grayson Whitmore was about to disappoint his mother, and for the first time, he didn't care. The decision felt like stepping off a cliff, but as he looked out at the city below, he realized he was finally ready to learn how to fly. The playground at Laurelhurst Park was alive with the sounds of childhood, laughter echoing from the swings, the rhythmic squeak of seesaws, and the delighted shrieks of children racing down slides. Naomi sat on a weathered bench, watching Oliver navigate the jungle gym with the fearless determination of a 2-year-old who believed the world was made for exploring. "Higher, Mama, higher!" he called from the top of the small climbing structure, his arms stretched toward the sky like he could touch the October clouds. "Don't be careful, sweetheart," Naomi called back, her voice carrying the practiced calm of a mother who had learned to let her child explore while keeping her heart in her throat. "He's fearless," the voice came from behind her, familiar and unwelcome. Naomi turned to find Grayson standing a few feet away, his expensive suit looking dramatically out of place among the casual parents in jeans and sneakers. He held a coffee cup in each hand, steam rising in the cool afternoon air. "What are you doing here?" The question came out sharper than she intended, but the sight of him in their safe space, the place where she'd brought Oliver countless times to run and play and forget about complicated grown-up problems, felt like an invasion. "I brought coffee." He gestured toward the cups with an awkward uncertainty she'd never seen from him before. "I thought we should talk. How did you know we'd be here?" A flush crept up his neck. "I may have asked around. Your neighbor mentioned you come here most afternoons." Naomi's protective instincts flared. "You were at my apartment building." "Just the lobby," he said quickly. "I wasn't. I didn't want to ambush you at home." She studied his face, searching for signs of the arrogance she remembered. Instead, she found something that looked almost like nervousness. It was unsettling. This version of Grayson Whitmore seemed human in ways that made her walls feel less secure. "Mama, look." Oliver had discovered the slide and was preparing for his first solo descent. At 2C, it was still a major accomplishment, and Naomi felt her attention split between her son's milestone and the man who was suddenly, impossibly, part of their story. "I see you, baby. You're so brave." Oliver beamed at the praise and launched himself down the slide with a squeal of pure joy. When he reached the bottom, he looked around for approval and spotted Grayson. Without the wariness of adults, he ran toward them on unsteady toddler legs. "Man!" he announced, pointing at Grayson with the directness that only small children possessed. "Yes," Naomi said carefully. This is Grayson." Oliver considered this information gravely. "Oh, Grayson," he repeated, the syllables clumsy on his tongue. Something shifted in Grayson's expression, a softening that made him look younger, more vulnerable. "Hello, Oliver." "Want to swing?" Oliver asked, with the generous spirit of a child who hadn't yet learned that adults were complicated. Naomi started to speak, to create an excuse, but Grayson was already setting down the coffee cups. "I'd like that very much." She watched, her heart doing dangerous things, as her son took his father's hand and led him toward the swings. Oliver chattered the entire way, his voice a stream of toddler observations about dogs and airplanes, and the interesting stick he'd found yesterday. Grayson listened with the focused attention of someone encountering a foreign language, occasionally glancing back at Naomi as if seeking translation. When Oliver climbed into the swing and expectantly held out his arms, Grayson hesitated for a moment before beginning to push. Gentle, careful movements that spoke of someone terrified of doing something wrong. "Higher," Oliver demanded, his legs kicking with excitement. "Is this okay?" Grayson called to Naomi, uncertainty clear in his voice. She nodded, not trusting her voice. There was something painfully touching about watching this powerful man, reduced to asking permission to push his own son on a swing. After 20 minutes of swings and slides, and Oliver's generous tour of every piece of playground equipment, the toddler began to show signs of the approaching naptime crash. His steps grew less steady, his chatter more scattered. "Someone's getting tired," Naomi observed, reaching for the diaper bag that went everywhere with them. "Oh, snack time," Oliver announced, gravitating toward her with the magnetic pull of a child seeking comfort. Naomi produced a container of cut fruit and a sippy cup of milk, and Oliver settled on her lap with the unconscious trust that made her throat tight. This was their routine, their rhythm, just the two of them against the world. But now Grayson was part of the equation, sitting on the bench beside them, watching his son eat apple slices with the fascination of someone witnessing a miracle. "He looks like you," Naomi said quietly, surprised by her own words. "He has your smile," Grayson replied, "and your way of observing everything before making a decision." The comment caught her off guard. She hadn't expected him to remember details about her, to have catalogued her expressions from their brief time together 3 years ago. "Grayson," she began, then stopped. What was she supposed to say? How did you navigate a conversation with someone who had dismissed you, denied you, and was now sitting beside you watching the child he'd refused to believe existed? "I was wrong," he said suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. 3 years ago, when you came to me, I was completely, devastatingly wrong." Oliver had finished his snack and was growing drowsy against her chest, his dark lashes fluttering as he fought sleep. Naomi stroked his hair automatically, the gesture as natural as breathing. "Wrong about what, specifically?" she asked, her tone carefully neutral. Grayson was quiet for a long moment, watching their son's face relax into the boneless peace of a child surrendering to exhaustion. "About you, about thinking you were someone who would lie about something like that, about believing that one night couldn't matter enough to change everything. But it did change everything," Naomi said softly. For me, it changed everything. I know that now." She looked at him then, really looked, and saw something that made her chest tighten. Regret, yes, but something deeper, something that looked like grief for time lost, chances wasted, words that couldn't be taken back. The question is," she said, adjusting Oliver's weight against her shoulder, "what do you want to change now?" Grayson met her eyes, and for a moment she saw past the boardroom confidence to the man underneath, uncertain, hopeful, afraid. "I want to know him. I want to be his father, if you'll let me. It's not that simple." "I know." "Do you?" The words came out more challenging than she'd intended, because being a father isn't about DNA tests and custody hearings. It's about 3 a.m. fevers and tantrums in grocery stores and reading the same book 47 times because it's his favorite. It's about showing up every single day, even when, especially when, it's hard. Something flickered across his face, determination maybe, or the beginning of understanding. "Then teach me." The simple request hung between them, loaded with possibilities and dangers in equal measure. Naomi looked down at Oliver, sleeping trustingly in her arms, and felt the weight of the decision she would have to make. In the distance, storm clouds were gathering over the mountains, promising rain by evening. But for now, the playground was still filled with sunshine and the sound of children's laughter, and for the first time in 3 years, Naomi allowed herself to consider the possibility that their story might not be ending, it might just be beginning. The Heathman Hotel's bar hadn't changed much in 3 years. The same dim lighting cast shadows across mahogany surfaces, the same jazz music played softly in the background, and the same sense of old-world elegance permeated the air. But as Naomi sat across from her best friend Isabella Martinez, nursing a glass of wine she barely tasted, everything felt different. "You're really considering this," Isabella said, her dark eyes studying Naomi with the piercing insight of someone who had been there through every sleepless night, every tear, every moment of doubt over the past 3 years. "I don't know what I'm considering," Naomi replied, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. "He says he wants to be a father. He says he wants to learn. And you believe him?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Isabella had been the one to hold Naomi's hair back during morning sickness, the one to drive her to prenatal appointments when she had no one else, the one to remind her that she was strong enough to do this alone when the world seemed determined to convince her otherwise. "I want to believe him," Naomi admitted quietly. "That's not the same thing." Through the bar's large windows, downtown Portland sparkled in the evening light. Somewhere out there, Oliver was safe with Mrs. Patterson, the retired teacher who lived in their building and had become a surrogate grandmother. The elderly woman had insisted on babysitting when Isabella had suggested this much-needed girls' night. "Tell me about that night again," Isabella said gently, "not the version you tell yourself to make it hurt less." "The real version." Naomi closed her eyes, and suddenly she was back in this very hotel, 3 years younger and infinitely more naive. The Pacific Northwest Economic Summit had been her first major conference as a senior analyst, her chance to prove herself in a field dominated by men twice her age, with twice her connections. "I was terrified," she began, surprised by the words. "I've been working on my presentation for months, but when I walked into that conference room and saw all those suits, all those important faces, I felt like I was drowning." She remembered standing at the podium, her hands shaking as she discussed emerging market trends, her voice growing stronger as she warmed to her subject. And then, during the networking reception afterward, a man had approached her. "And he told me my presentation was brilliant," she continued, opening her eyes to find Isabella listening intently. "He said I'd challenged assumptions he'd held for years about international investment strategies. We talked for hours, really talked, about economics, about literature, about our families, about your families." Naomi nodded, the memory becoming clearer. "He told me about growing up with expectations, about feeling like he could never be just himself. I told him about my parents, divorce, about always feeling like I had to prove I was worth staying for. It had been that vulnerability, that unexpected depth that had drawn her to him, not his money or his power. She hadn't even known who he was at first, but the loneliness she recognized because it mirrored her own. And then we came up here." Naomi gestured toward the ceiling, toward the rooms above. "Room 412. I know it sounds crazy, but it felt inevitable, like everything in my life had been leading to that moment. The night had been tender, passionate, real, in ways that had shattered every assumption she'd held about casual encounters. They'd talked until dawn, their bodies intertwined, sharing stories and dreams with the intimacy of longtime lovers. "What changed?" Isabella asked, though she knew the answer. "Reality." The word tasted bitter. "I woke up alone." There was a note, polite, distant, thanking me for a pleasant evening and saying he hoped there were no misunderstandings about expectations. It was like he'd become a different person overnight. The transformation had been so complete, so jarring, that she'd almost convinced herself she'd imagined the connection they'd shared. Almost. "But you were already pregnant." "I didn't know for another 6 weeks." Naomi took a sip of wine, remembering the shock of those 2 pink lines. "When I finally worked up the courage to contact him, he'd just gotten engaged to someone else, someone appropriate, someone from his world." The conversation that followed had been devastating. Grayson, cold, dismissive, nothing like the man who had held her so tenderly, had accused her of trying to trap him. He'd suggested she was confused about timing, about paternity, about her own motivations. "He looked at me like I was something distasteful," she whispered, "like I was lying, scheming, everything cheap and calculating. I walked out of his office feeling smaller than I'd ever felt in my life." Isabella reached across the table, covering Naomi's hand with her own. "But you kept Oliver." "I couldn't not keep him." The conviction in her voice surprised them both. "Despite everything, the rejection, the accusations, the fear, I loved him before I even saw him. He was part of me, part of that one perfect night when I felt like I could be anyone, do anything. And now," Naomi thought about the playground, about Grayson's careful gentleness with Oliver, about the way he'd looked when their son had asked him to push the swing. "Now I don't know what to think." Is this the real Grayson? The one who wants to learn to be a father? Or is he the man who called me a liar and walked away? Maybe he's both, Isabella suggested quietly. Maybe people can change, or maybe they just get better at pretending. The bar was filling up with the after-work crowd. Young professionals unwinding, couples on dates, groups of friends celebrating small victories. Normal people living normal lives, unburdened by the weight of impossible decisions. "What does your heart tell you?" Isabella asked. Naomi looked toward the elevator that led to the upper floors, toward the room where her life had changed forever. "My heart is scared. It's been broken before, and it's learned to be careful. But when I see him with Oliver," she trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Isabella leaned forward. "When you see him with Oliver, what?" "I see the man I fell for that night, the one who was gentle and funny and real." Naomi's voice dropped to a whisper. "As I see someone who could love us if I let him, and that terrifies you. It terrifies me because I want it. Despite everything he put me through, despite the walls I've built, despite every rational reason to protect myself, I want it." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the admission settling between them. Outside, the first drops of the promised rain began to streak the windows. "So what are you going to do?" Isabella asked finally. Naomi straightened her shoulders, feeling something shift inside her chest. "I'm going to take the biggest risk of my life." "Which is?" She met her friend's eyes, seeing her own determination reflected there. "I'm going to give him a chance to prove he's the man I thought he could be. For Oliver's sake, for my sake, for the sake of the family we might have been if fear hadn't gotten in the way." As they prepared to leave, Naomi cast one last look around the bar. This place held their beginning, both the beautiful truth of their connection and the painful lie of its aftermath. But maybe, she thought, it was time to write a different ending. The rain was falling harder now, washing the city clean. And for the first time in 3 years, Naomi felt ready to step into the storm. The children's section of Powell's books was a maze of colorful displays and tiny chairs, filled with the quiet chaos of toddlers discovering the magic of stories. Grayson stood in the entrance, feeling more out of place than he had in any boardroom negotiation. His tailored charcoal suit drew curious glances from parents in casual weekend wear, and he tugged at his tie, wondering if he should have asked what the dress code was for a Saturday morning with a 2-year-old. "Grayson?" Naomi's voice carried a note of surprise as she approached with Oliver's hand firmly in hers. "You're early." "I didn't want to be late." The admission sounded awkward, even to his own ears. He'd been circling the block for 20 minutes, too nervous to go inside, too determined to disappoint to leave. Oliver looked up at him with bright recognition. "Grayson, you came!" The pure joy in his son's voice hit Grayson like a physical blow. When had anyone ever been that excited to see him? In his world of calculated smiles and strategic pleasantries, such unguarded enthusiasm felt revolutionary. "I promised I would," Grayson said, crouching down to Oliver's eye level, "and I always keep my promises." Naomi's expression softened slightly, though wariness still shadowed her dark eyes. She'd agreed to this supervised visit, neutral ground, public space, an easy escape if things went wrong. It had taken 3 phone calls and careful negotiation to arrange, like a diplomatic summit between warring nations. "Oliver loves the Saturday story time," she explained, shifting a well-worn tote bag higher on her shoulder. "But fair warning, it can get pretty chaotic." As if summoned by her words, a small army of children suddenly burst around the corner, their voices rising in excited chatter about dragons and princesses and magical kingdoms. Oliver's eyes lit up, and he tugged at Naomi's hand. "Story time, Mama, it's starting." "We should find seats," Naomi said, but Oliver had already spotted something that captured his attention completely. "Doggy book." He pointed to a display of picture books featuring various animals, his whole body vibrating with 2-year-old enthusiasm. Grayson followed his gaze and found himself looking at a colorful board book about a golden retriever puppy learning to swim. Without thinking, he picked it up and flipped through the pages. "Do you like dogs?" he asked Oliver, who nodded so vigorously his dark hair bounced. "Woof, woof! Big dogs, little dogs." Oliver's hands gestured wildly as he attempted to encompass all of dogdom in his limited vocabulary. "I had a dog when I was your age," Grayson said, surprised by the memory that surfaced. "His name was Rex, and he was this massive German shepherd who thought he was a lapdog." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "You had a dog." "My father believed pets taught responsibility." The words came out more bitter than he'd intended. "Of course, I wasn't actually allowed to take care of Rex myself. That was the housekeeper's job. I was just supposed to learn discipline by watching from a distance." The honesty caught him off guard. He'd never told anyone about Rex, about how the dog had slept by his bedroom door despite being forbidden from the upper floors, about how his father had given the animal away when Grayson left for boarding school, because there was no point keeping a pet without its purpose. Oliver, oblivious to the adult undercurrents, had climbed onto one of the tiny chairs near the reading corner and was patting the seat next to him. "Sit, Grayson! Sit!" Grayson looked at the child-sized furniture, then at his expensive suit, then at his son's expectant face. Without hesitation, he folded his considerable height into the miniature chair, his knees nearly touching his chin. "Comfortable?" Naomi asked, and there was something that might have been amusement in her voice. "Perfectly," he lied, earning a genuine smile that transformed her entire face. The story-time librarian, a woman in her 60s with silver curls and a voice made for fairy tales, called the group to attention. As she began reading about a brave little mouse on a big adventure, Grayson found himself mesmerized not by the story, but by watching Oliver's reactions. His son's eyes widened during suspenseful moments, he gasped at plot twists, and he giggled with infectious delight at the funny parts. Everything was immediate, visceral, honest. When the mouse faced a particularly scary challenge, Oliver unconsciously reached for Grayson's hand, his small fingers gripping tightly. The trust in that gesture, automatic, instinctive, made Grayson's throat close up. This child barely knew him, had no reason to believe in him, yet he was offering comfort and seeking protection with the same generous spirit he'd shown at the playground. "He's incredible," Grayson whispered to Naomi. She was watching them both with an expression he couldn't quite read. "He is. But Grayson—" She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "Children trust easily. They believe what adults tell them, and they forgive quickly when they're hurt. But that doesn't mean the hurt doesn't matter." The warning was gentle but clear. Oliver might be open to love now, but that openness was precious, fragile. It was Grayson's responsibility to protect it. After story time, they wandered through the children's section, Oliver gravitating toward books with bright pictures and simple words. Grayson found himself genuinely interested in each selection, asking questions about colors and animals and counting games that made Oliver beam with pride at his growing knowledge. "He's smart," Grayson observed, as Oliver correctly identified different shapes in a puzzle book. "Scary smart sometimes," Naomi agreed. "Yesterday, he figured out how to unlock the child-proof cabinet in the bathroom. I found him trying to brush his teeth with my moisturizer." The domestic detail painted a picture of their daily life, the ordinary moments of motherhood that Grayson had missed, would always miss. 2 years of first words and first steps, of bedtime stories and morning snuggles, of building a life and a relationship he'd never been part of. "I want to make up for lost time," he said suddenly. Naomi's smile faded. "You can't make up for lost time. You can only make the most of the time you have now." Before he could respond, Oliver had discovered the store's resident cat, a large orange tabby who presided over the children's section with benevolent authority. The toddler approached slowly, his hands extended in the universal gesture of a child wanting to pet an animal. "Gentle," Naomi reminded him. "And remember what we practiced?" Oliver nodded solemnly and very carefully stroked the cat's fur with one finger. The cat purred approvingly, and Oliver's face lit up with wonder. "Nice kitty," he whispered. Soft kitty. Watching his son discover simple joy in small moments, Grayson felt something crack open in his chest. This was what he'd been missing, not just in Oliver's life, but in his own. When had he last felt wonder at anything? When had he last approached the world with openness instead of calculation? Thank you, he said to Naomi as they prepared to leave, Oliver clutching a new book about friendly farm animals. For what? For this. For letting me see who he is. For letting me remember who I used to be. She studied his face for a long moment. This is just the beginning, you know. Being a parent isn't about perfect Saturday mornings in bookstores. It's about sleepless nights and tantrums and making 1,000 small decisions that might be wrong. I know, do you? The challenge was gentle but real, because real parenthood isn't always this charming. Sometimes it's thankless and exhausting and scary. Grayson looked down at Oliver, who was now reading his new book to the store cat with serious concentration. Then I guess I'd better learn fast. As they walked toward the exit, Oliver suddenly stopped and looked up at both of them. Family, he asked, his voice hopeful and uncertain. The question hung in the air like a prayer. Naomi's eyes filled with tears. She quickly blinked away, and Grayson felt the weight of possibility and responsibility settle on his shoulders. We're working on it, sweetheart, Naomi said softly. And for the first time since the paternity test results had turned his world upside down, Grayson began to believe they actually could be. The emergency room at Oregon Health and Science University was a symphony of controlled chaos, beeping monitors, hurried footsteps, and the low murmur of medical professionals communicating in their urgent shorthand. Naomi sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair, Oliver's small body curled in her lap, his breathing finally steady after what had felt like the longest 2 hours of her life. Febrile seizure, the pediatric resident had explained with the clinical detachment that doctors learned to maintain their sanity, common in toddlers with high fevers, scary for parents, but rarely dangerous. Rarely dangerous. The words should have been comforting, but Naomi couldn't shake the image of Oliver's tiny body convulsing in her arms, his eyes rolling back, his skin burning with fever. She'd called 911, called Isabella, called everyone except the one person who had every right to know his son was in the hospital. Her phone buzzed for the 7th time. Grayson's name lit up the screen, and guilt twisted in her stomach. She'd been avoiding his calls all week, overwhelmed by the intensity of their bookstore visit and the questions it had raised about their future. Now, with Oliver's crisis, her silence felt cruel. "Mama," Oliver whispered, his voice hoarse from crying. "Throat hurts." "I know, baby, the medicine is helping." She pressed her lips to his forehead, relieved to find it cooler than before. "We'll go home soon." Ms. Ellison, a nurse, appeared beside them, her scrubs decorated with cartoon dinosaurs that made Oliver lift his head with weak interest. "Dr. Hayes wants to keep you for another hour of observation, just to be safe." Naomi nodded, settling Oliver more comfortably against her chest. He was already drifting back to sleep, exhausted by his body's fight against the fever. This was parenthood, the terrifying responsibility of keeping another human being safe when their world could change in an instant. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text. "Naomi, please call me back. I'm worried." The concern in those simple words broke through her defenses. Before she could second-guess herself, she was dialing his number. "Naomi?" Grayson's voice was tight with anxiety. "Thank God. Are you okay?" "I've been calling." "I'm fine," she said quickly, then paused. "Actually, no, I'm not fine. Oliver's in the hospital." The silence on the other end was deafening. When Grayson spoke again, his voice was strained. "What happened? Is he... How serious?" "He had a febrile seizure, high fever. He's okay now, but..." Her voice cracked, despite her efforts to stay strong. It was terrifying. "Where are you?" "OHSU emergency room." "I'm coming." "Grayson, you don't have to..." "He's my son." The words were firm, final. "I'm coming." The line went dead, leaving Naomi staring at her phone. Part of her wanted to call back, to tell him it wasn't necessary, that she had handled crises alone for 2 years and could continue doing so. But a larger part, the part that had been carrying everything alone for so long, felt a dangerous relief at the idea of sharing this burden. 25 minutes later, Grayson burst through the emergency room doors like a man possessed. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his tie askew, his face pale with the kind of panic that only came from imagining the worst possible scenarios. His eyes found them immediately, and Naomi watched as relief flooded his features when he saw Oliver sleeping peacefully in her arms. "How is he?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper as he approached. "Stable. The fever broke an hour ago." Naomi shifted slightly, making room on the narrow chair. "The doctor says febrile seizures are common, but watching your child convulse isn't something you get used to," Grayson finished, settling beside them with careful movements that wouldn't disturb Oliver. She looked at him in surprise. "How did you know?" "I researched it on the drive over, read everything I could find about febrile seizures, emergency protocols, recovery times." His laugh was shaky. Amazing what you can learn in 20 minutes of pure terror." Oliver stirred in her arms, his eyes fluttering open. When he saw Grayson, a weak smile crossed his flushed face. "Grayson," he whispered, "you came." "Of course I came," Grayson said, his voice thick with emotion. "How are you feeling, buddy?" "Yucky," Oliver admitted with the honesty of a sick child. Grayson's hand hovered uncertainly over Oliver's head before gently stroking his hair. "I'm sorry you don't feel good. Mama gave me medicine," Oliver reported. "Tasted purple." "Purple medicine is the best kind," Grayson agreed solemnly, earning a tiny giggle from his son. Watching them together, Naomi felt something shift in her chest. This wasn't the calculated visit of a man trying to win points or build a case for custody. This was raw parental fear and relief, the primal need to protect and comfort that transcended legal documents and carefully negotiated arrangements. "You didn't have to come," she said quietly. Grayson's eyes met hers over Oliver's head. "Yes, I did. When you said he was in the hospital, nothing else mattered. Not meetings, not conferences, not anything. I just needed to be here. Even though you barely know him." "He's my son," Grayson repeated, and this time the words carried a weight they hadn't before. "I may not know his favorite bedtime story or what he likes for breakfast, but I know that when he's hurt, I need to be here. When he's scared, I want to help him feel safe." Oliver had drifted back to sleep, his small hand fisted in Naomi's sweater. In the harsh, fluorescent lighting of the emergency room, he looked impossibly fragile, impossibly precious. "This is what I was trying to tell you," Naomi said softly. "Parenthood isn't bookstore visits and story time. It's nights like this, when everything feels uncertain and you realize how little control you actually have. I'm starting to understand that." A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the steady rhythm of Oliver's breathing and the distant sounds of the hospital around them. When Dr. Hayes finally appeared to discharge them, Naomi felt unprepared to leave their strange sanctuary. "Everything looks good," the doctor said, reviewing Oliver's chart. "They keep him hydrated, monitor his temperature, and don't hesitate to call if you're concerned about anything." As they prepared to leave, Grayson hesitated. Would it be okay if I came with you, to make sure he settles in okay at home?" Naomi studied his face, seeing genuine concern rather than manipulation. "It's late. You probably have early meetings. I cleared my schedule for the rest of the week." The rest of the week. "I told my assistant that I have a family emergency and I'm not available unless the building is literally on fire." His smile was tentative. "Turns out there are more important things than quarterly reports." Outside, the November rain had settled into a steady drizzle that turned the city lights into watercolor smears. Grayson's driver waited with the car running, and he helped Naomi settle Oliver into his car seat with the careful attention of someone still learning the mechanics of fatherhood. During the ride to her apartment, Oliver woke up briefly and asked for water. Grayson immediately produced a bottle from somewhere, and Naomi watched in amazement as he helped their son drink with the patient gentleness of someone who was learning to put another person's needs first. "You're getting the hang of this," she said quietly. "I have a good teacher," he replied, his eyes meeting hers in the car's dim interior. When they reached her building, Grayson walked them to the door, carrying the diaper bag and Oliver's new book from their bookstore visit. At the entrance to her apartment, he hesitated. "Thank you," he said, "for calling me, for letting me be here. Thank you for coming." They stood there for a moment, the weight of the evening settling between them. Oliver was already asleep again in her arms, trusting and safe, and Naomi felt the dangerous pull of letting someone else share the load she'd been carrying alone. "Grayson," she began, then stopped, unsure how to voice what she was feeling. "I know," he said softly. "Tonight changed things." She nodded, not trusting her voice. "I'll get some rest," he said, pressing a gentle kiss to Oliver's forehead before stepping back. "I'll call tomorrow to check on him." As she watched him disappear into the elevator, Naomi realized that somewhere between the emergency room and her front door, the walls around her heart had developed their first real crack, and for the first time since Oliver's birth, she wasn't sure she wanted to repair it. The coffee shop on Division Street was exactly the kind of place Vivian Blackstone would never normally set foot in. Mismatched furniture, indie music playing at volumes that required actual conversation, and baristas with visible tattoos. But desperate times called for desperate measures, and Vivian Blackstone was nothing if not strategic in her desperation. She sat in the corner booth, her Hermes bag positioned precisely on the scratched wooden table, her perfectly manicured fingers wrapped around a cup of coffee she had no intention of drinking. Through the rain-streaked window, she watched Naomi Ellison's apartment building with the focused attention of a predator studying prey. 3 days. 3 days since Grayson had cleared his schedule for a family emergency and effectively disappeared from their social circle. 3 days since whispers had begun circulating about the Whitmore heir and his sudden interest in paternity responsibilities. 3 days since Vivian's carefully laid plans for reconciliation had crumbled like a house of cards. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "The Hartwell dinner is next week. Bring Grayson. Time to announce the engagement." Vivian stared at the message, her jaw clenching. For 6 months, she'd been working her way back into Grayson's life, carefully orchestrated encounters at charity galas, intimate dinners with mutual friends, subtle reminders of what they'd once meant to each other. She'd been so close to reclaiming her rightful place as the future Mrs. Grayson Whitmore. Then this woman, this nobody from nowhere, had appeared with her inconvenient truth and her adorable child, threatening to destroy everything Vivian had spent years building. The apartment building's front door opened, and Naomi emerged with a toddler bundled in a bright red coat. Even from a distance, Vivian could see the family resemblance, the same dark hair, the same determined set to his small shoulders that Grayson had possessed even as a child. Vivian had known Grayson since they were teenagers, had been part of his world when world-shaping decisions were made over champagne dinners and weekend trips to family estates. She understood him in ways this woman never could: his need for control, his fear of vulnerability, his deep-seated belief that love was a luxury successful people couldn't afford. That belief had served Vivian well for years. It had been the foundation of their relationship, elegant, practical, devoid of messy emotions that complicated business arrangements. When he'd broken their engagement 3 years ago, citing timing and personal growth, she'd known it was temporary. Men like Grayson always returned to what made sense. But watching him now through the coffee shop window as he approached Naomi and the child, Vivian saw something that made her blood run cold. He was smiling, not the controlled, practiced expression he wore at board meetings, but something genuine and unguarded. When the little boy ran toward him with obvious delight, Grayson swept him up with the natural ease of someone who was learning to love without calculation. This was not the man Vivian had expected to reclaim. She finished her coffee, which was surprisingly good, though she'd never admit it, and made her decision. If Grayson couldn't see reason on his own, perhaps he needed a reminder of what he was throwing away. An hour later, Vivian stood outside Naomi's apartment building, her courage fortified by years of social conditioning that had taught her to smile while delivering devastating news. The building was older, but well-maintained, the kind of place where middle-class families raised children and built ordinary lives. How quaint. The directory showed N. Ellison, 3B, and Vivian pressed the buzzer with the confidence of someone who had never been denied entry anywhere. Yes, Naomi's voice crackled through the intercom. Ms. Ellison, my name is Vivian Blackstone. I'm a friend of Grayson's. I was hoping we could talk. The pause that followed stretched long enough to suggest Naomi was debating whether to hang up. Finally, I'll be right down. Naomi appeared in the lobby 5 minutes later, and Vivian had to admit the woman was lovelier than the newspaper photos had suggested. There was something earthy and genuine about her that would appeal to a man going through a midlife crisis of conscience. Ms. Blackstone, Naomi said, her voice carefully neutral. What can I do for you? Please, call me Vivian, and I was hoping we could talk privately about Grayson. Naomi's expression didn't change, but Vivian caught the slight tightening around her eyes. Good. She was already on guard. Oh, I'm not sure what there is to discuss. I think there's quite a lot, actually. Vivian smiled with practiced warmth. Perhaps we could walk. I find difficult conversations are easier with fresh air. They stepped outside into the Portland drizzle, and Vivian immediately regretted the suggestion. Her Italian leather shoes weren't designed for wet sidewalks, and the humidity was already wreaking havoc with her blowout. You were engaged to him, Naomi said without preamble. 3 years ago. We were. Vivian decided honesty, or at least a version of it, might serve her better than games. We'd been together since college. Everyone expected us to marry. But you didn't. No. Grayson called it off rather suddenly, said he needed time to figure out what he really wanted. Vivian's laugh was carefully bitter. Men and their need for self-discovery. They walked in silence for a block, rain misting around them like a confession booth. Finally, Vivian played her first card. He came to me last week, she said quietly, after the paternity test results. Naomi stopped walking. Excuse me? He was confused, scared. The Grayson I know doesn't handle uncertainty well. He needed someone who understood him, who could help him process what this all meant. It wasn't entirely a lie. Grayson had called her, though their conversation had been brief and his rejection of her comfort absolute. But Naomi didn't need to know that. What did he tell you? Naomi's voice was steady, but Vivian could hear the uncertainty underneath, that he felt trapped, that he never wanted children. Never wanted the complications of a ready-made family. Vivian paused, studying Naomi's face. He asked me what I thought he should do. And what did you tell him? Vivian smiled sadly. I told him what I'm telling you now. Grayson is a good man, but he's not built for this kind of life. He doesn't know how to love without conditions, how to put someone else's needs first. He's trying now because his conscience demands it, but eventually he'll resent the limitations. Naomi had gone very still. You think he'll leave? I think he'll realize that playing house with you is costing him everything he's worked for, his business relationships, his social connections, his freedom to make decisions without considering a toddler's nap schedule. Vivian's voice softened with false sympathy. And when that happens, he'll hurt you both in ways you can't imagine. The words hung between them like poison in the rain-soaked air. Vivian could see them taking root in Naomi's mind, feeding the fears that any single mother would have about trusting a man who had once rejected her completely. Why are you telling me this? Naomi asked finally. Because I care about Grayson. And because I don't want to see your son get his heart broken when his father realizes that love isn't enough to change who you fundamentally are. As Vivian walked away, her heels clicking against wet concrete, she allowed herself a small smile. Sometimes the kindest thing you could do for someone was help them see the truth before it was too late. even if that truth was exactly what you needed them to believe. The text from Grayson came at 7:23 a.m. "Can I take Oliver to the zoo today? Weather's supposed to clear up." Naomi stared at her phone for a full minute, Vivian's words from the previous day echoing in her mind like a poisonous refrain. He doesn't know how to love without conditions. Eventually, he'll resent the limitations. Oliver was in his high chair, systematically deconstructing his breakfast waffle while humming a tuneless song about dinosaurs. Innocent, trusting, completely unaware that the adult world was full of people who said one thing while meaning another. "Mama sad?" Oliver asked, looking up from his syrup-covered masterpiece with concern that was heartbreaking in its simplicity. "No, baby, Mama's just thinking." She forced a smile and wiped his sticky fingers. "Do you want to see the animals today?" Oliver's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Zebras, lions, Grayson too." Yes, Grayson too. But even as she typed her response, "Sure, meet us there at 10, doubt gnawed at her stomach like hunger. Was she making a mistake? Was she setting Oliver up for heartbreak when Grayson inevitably realized that fatherhood was more complicated than weekend adventures? The Oregon Zoo was crowded despite the overcast sky, filled with families making the most of a Saturday that promised to stay dry. Naomi found Grayson waiting by the entrance, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him, in jeans and a navy sweater that made his eyes seem impossibly grey. "Oliver!" he called, crouching down as the toddler broke free from Naomi's hand and ran toward him. Ready for an adventure. Watching them together, Grayson's face lighting up at Oliver's excitement, her son's complete trust in this man who was still essentially a stranger, Naomi felt the familiar war between hope and protection rage in her chest. "You seem tense," Grayson observed as they walked toward the African exhibits. Oliver was between them, his small hands holding one of each of theirs, chattering about all the animals he wanted to see. "I'm fine." But she wasn't fine, and Grayson knew it. She could feel him studying her profile, trying to read the distance she'd carefully reconstructed overnight. At the lion exhibit, Oliver pressed his face against the glass while a massive male paced behind the barrier. "Big kitty," he whispered in awe. "That's right," Grayson said, lifting Oliver to get a better view. "See how he's protecting his family? That's what daddies do." The casual reference to fatherhood, to protection, to family, hit Naomi like a physical blow. How easy it was for him to say these things, to play this role, when he had no idea what real protection looked like. Real protection was sitting up all night with a sick child, was choosing between groceries and pediatrician visits, was building a life strong enough to weather any storm. "Naomi," Grayson's voice was gentle but insistent. "Undo what's wrong?" She opened her mouth to deflect, to maintain the careful politeness that had gotten them this far. Instead, the words that came out surprised them both. "Someone came to see me yesterday. Vivian?" Grayson went very still, his arms tightening protectively around Oliver. "What did she want?" "To help me understand you better, apparently." Naomi's laugh was bitter. "Or to warn me about what I was getting myself into." "And what did she tell you?" Naomi watched a mother elephant guide her baby toward a mud wallow, patient and protective and endlessly devoted. "That you asked her advice about us, about Oliver, that you felt trapped. That's not—" Grayson's voice was sharp, then he caught himself, lowering his tone as Oliver looked up with curiosity. "Naomi, whatever she told you, it wasn't true. Wasn't it?" She turned to face him fully. "Did you call her after the paternity test?" The pause that followed was answer enough. Grayson's jaw tightened, and she could see him choosing his words carefully. "I called her, yes, but not for the reasons you think." "Then why?" "Because I was scared." The admission seemed to cost him. "Because suddenly I had a son, and I had no idea how to be a father, and I needed to talk to someone who knew me well enough to tell me the truth." "And what truth was that?" Grayson set Oliver down gently, the toddler immediately running to look at the baby elephant. For a moment, they stood in silence, watching their son discover wonder in simple things. "That I was falling in love," Grayson said quietly. "With him, with you. With the idea of a family I never thought I wanted. Naomi's breath caught. What? Vivian told me I was making a mistake, that I didn't know how to love without destroying what I touched, that I was setting myself up for failure. His eyes met hers. She was right about one thing. I don't know how to do this. But she was wrong about why I'm trying. Why are you trying? Because for the first time in my life, I found something worth changing for. The words hung between them, honest and raw and terrifying in their vulnerability. Around them, families moved through their Saturday routines, parents chasing toddlers, teenagers rolling their eyes at educational exhibits, grandparents pointing out animals with patient repetition. "Oliver, stay where I can see you," Naomi called automatically as their son wandered toward the next exhibit. "Mama! Daddy! Look!" Oliver's voice carried across the space, and it took both of them a moment to realize what he'd said. "Daddy!" Grayson's face went white, then flushed with something that looked like wonder and terror in equal measure. "He called me," I heard. They stared at each other, the weight of that single word changing everything. Oliver ran back to them, completely unaware of the seismic shift he'd just created. "Daddy, up!" he said to Grayson, his arms raised expectantly. Grayson looked at Naomi questioningly, and she could see the hope and fear warring in his expression. After a moment that felt like an eternity, she nodded. He lifted Oliver, his hands shaking slightly. "Hi, buddy." "Hi, Daddy." Naomi felt tears threaten and turned away, pretending to read an information placard about elephant social structures. "Mothers stay with their daughters for life," she read. "Family bonds are the strongest force in elephant society." "Naomi," Grayson's voice was soft, "I know Vivian planted doubts. I know you have every reason not to trust me, but I need you to know I didn't call her because I felt trapped. I called her because I was terrified of how much I wanted this." She turned back to find him watching her with an intensity that made her chest tight. Oliver was pointing at something in the distance, chattering about big grey elephants, but Grayson's attention was entirely on her. "What did you tell her?" Naomi asked. "That she was wrong. That love isn't about convenience or social expectations or maintaining the status quo. That sometimes the best thing you can do is let your life be completely disrupted by something beautiful." A group of school children rushed past, their excited voices mixing with Oliver's delighted laughter as he spotted the elephants. Normal family chaos, normal Saturday joy. "I'm scared," Naomi admitted finally. "So am I. But you're still here." "I'm still here." Oliver wiggled to be put down, then took both their hands again with the casual assumption that this was how things should be. As they walked toward the elephant exhibit, Naomi felt something shift inside her chest. Not the walls coming down completely, but maybe a window opening. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was possibility. And for the first time since Vivian's visit, that felt like enough. The custody hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in November, when the Portland rain had turned vicious and the courthouse steps were slick with fallen leaves. Naomi sat in the hallway outside Judge Patterson's courtroom, Oliver fidgeting on her lap while she tried to project a confidence she didn't feel. 3 weeks had passed since the zoo, 3 weeks of careful progress and tentative hope. Grayson had been consistent, patient, slowly earning both her trust and Oliver's love. They'd had dinner twice, awkward but genuine attempts at becoming something that resembled a family. She should have known it wouldn't last. "Ms. Ellison," Rebecca Torres, appeared beside them, her expression carefully neutral in the way that meant bad news was coming. "I need to speak with you privately before we go in." Naomi's stomach dropped. What's wrong?" "There's been a development. Mr. Whitmore's legal team has filed an emergency motion." Isabella, who had taken the morning off work to provide moral support, immediately reached for Oliver. "Come here, sweetie. Let's look at the fish tank." Once they were alone, Rebecca's professional mask slipped slightly. "They're alleging that you've been deliberately interfering with his parental rights. They have documentation of times when he requested visits and you refused or postponed. That's not, I never..." Naomi's mind raced. There had been exactly 2 occasions when she'd had to reschedule because Oliver was sick, and one time when she'd asked to meet somewhere other than her apartment because she wasn't ready for that level of intimacy. They also have testimony suggesting you've been coaching Oliver to resist forming a bond with his father. The accusation was so far from the truth that Naomi actually laughed, a sharp sound that echoed off the courthouse walls. Coaching him. Oliver adores Grayson. He calls him Daddy, for God's sake. I know. But they have a witness who says otherwise. Rebecca handed her a legal document, and Naomi's world tilted as she read the name at the bottom. Vivian Blackstone had provided a sworn statement alleging that Naomi had admitted to manipulating the situation, to using Oliver as a pawn to secure financial benefits from the Whitmore family. "This is insane," Naomi whispered. "She's lying. Can you prove that?" Before Naomi could answer, the courtroom doors opened and Grayson emerged, flanked by 2 lawyers in expensive suits. When he saw her, something flickered across his face. Guilt, maybe, or regret, but he quickly looked away. "Grayson," Naomi stood, Oliver automatically reaching for her. "What's going on?" He stopped, his lawyers exchanging glances that spoke volumes about their patience with their client's conscience. "Naomi, Mr. Whitmore," the older attorney interrupted smoothly. "We discussed this. Any communication should go through proper channels." "Like hell," Naomi said, her voice rising despite Oliver's presence. "You want to talk about proper channels? How about talking to me before blindsiding me with false accusations?" "Miss Ellison," Rebecca warned quietly, "this isn't the place." But Naomi was past caring about proper places or professional courtesy. 3 weeks of careful progress, of watching Grayson learn to be a father, of allowing herself to hope, and he'd thrown it all away for what? Legal strategy. "Is this what you want?" she asked Grayson directly. "To drag our son through a custody battle based on lies?" Grayson's jaw tightened. "I want what's best for Oliver. And you think taking him away from the only parent he's ever known is what's best? I think he deserves stability, security, opportunities you can't provide." The words hit like physical blows. This was the old Grayson, cold, calculating, convinced that money could solve any problem and power could overcome any obstacle. The man who had learned to change diapers and read bedtime stories seemed to have vanished completely. "Daddy!" Oliver's small voice cut through the tension, confusion clear in his tone. He reached toward Grayson, who took a step back as if his son's touch might burn him. That single movement, the rejection of his own child's affection, broke something fundamental in Naomi's chest. "Don't," she said quietly, shifting Oliver higher on her hip. "Don't you dare hurt him because you're too scared to fight for what you really want. You don't know what I want. I know you're terrified of becoming your father. I know you're letting his voice and your mother's expectations convince you that love is weakness." Her voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more force than shouting. "And I know that if you do this, if you turn our son into a legal battle instead of a blessing, you'll never forgive yourself." For a moment, Grayson's mask slipped. She saw the man who had pushed Oliver on swings, who had researched febrile seizures in a panic, who had held their son while he slept in a hospital chair. But then his lawyers moved closer, and the walls went back up. "The hearing starts in 10 minutes, the younger attorney said. "We should prepare." As they walked away, Oliver began to cry, not the demanding wail of a toddler's tantrum, but the heartbroken sobs of a child who understood that something precious was being taken away. "Daddy, come back," he asked through his tears. "Daddy, come back." Naomi held him tighter, her own tears falling freely now. "I don't know, baby. I don't know." Isabella appeared beside them with tissues and the fierce expression of a woman ready to commit violence on behalf of the people she loved. "What do you need?" "A miracle," Naomi whispered. Inside the courtroom, Judge Patterson called the hearing to order. Naomi took her seat at the defendant's table, Oliver quiet now, but clinging to her with the desperate grip of someone who sensed that everything was about to change. Across the aisle, Grayson sat ramrod straight, his face a mask of corporate composure. He didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge Oliver's presence, didn't seem to remember that just days ago they'd been talking about Thanksgiving dinner and Christmas traditions. The lead attorney stood to present their case, his voice confident and dismissive as he painted Naomi as an opportunistic single mother using her child to manipulate a wealthy man. Each accusation was designed to strip away her dignity, her credibility, her right to protect the son she'd raised alone. But as the hearing progressed, something strange began to happen. Grayson grew more and more tense, his hands clenched in his lap, his breathing shallow. When Oliver whispered "Mama" and snuggled closer to her, seeking comfort in the chaos around him, Grayson finally looked their way. What he saw there, his son's trust, Naomi's quiet strength, the family they could have been, made him close his eyes as if in pain. The attorney was building toward his closing argument when Oliver, tired of sitting still and confused by the adult anger surrounding him, slipped from Naomi's lap and walked across the aisle. "Daddy sad?" he asked, his small hand reaching for Grayson's knee. "Daddy cry?" The courtroom went silent. Judge Patterson leaned forward, watching as Grayson stared down at his son with an expression of absolute devastation. And in that moment of perfect, crystalline clarity, Grayson Whitmore finally understood what he was about to lose. "Your Honor, I need to withdraw the petition." Grayson's voice cut through the courtroom silence like a blade, steady and clear despite the tremor in his hands. His attorneys turned to him in shock, but he was looking only at Oliver, who stood between his parents with the innocent confusion of a child caught in an adult storm. "Mr. Whitmore," Judge Patterson said carefully, "are you certain this is a significant legal proceeding?" Grayson stood, his expensive suit suddenly feeling like armor he no longer wanted to wear. "I'm certain, Your Honor. More certain than I've ever been about anything in my life." He turned to his lead attorney, whose face had gone pale with professional horror. This was wrong. All of it. The petition, the accusations, the entire approach. It was wrong. "Grayson," the lawyer hissed, "think about what you're doing. Your mother's instructions were very clear." "My mother isn't here," Grayson said quietly, "and she's not Oliver's father." "I am." He walked around the table toward his son, ignoring the whispered conferences erupting behind him. When he knelt down to Oliver's eye level, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. "Hey, buddy," he said softly. "Daddy's sorry he made you sad." Oliver studied his face with the serious attention that 2-year-olds reserved for important matters. "No more sad, Daddy." "No more sad," Grayson promised, then looked up at Naomi. "As if your mama will forgive me." Naomi's eyes were bright with unshed tears, her face a war between hope and the protective instincts that had kept her and Oliver safe for so long. "Grayson, what are you doing?" "What I should have done from the beginning." He stood, Oliver's small hand trustingly in his. "Your Honor, I'd like to address the court." Judge Patterson nodded, her expression thoughtful. She'd been presiding over family court for 15 years, and she recognized the moment when legal proceedings gave way to something more fundamental. "3 weeks ago," Grayson began, his voice carrying to every corner of the courtroom, "I learned I had a son. I was angry, scared, and completely unprepared for what that meant. I hired lawyers because that's what I do. I solve problems with strategy and leverage and enough money to make inconvenient truths disappear." Behind him, his attorneys were frantically whispering about damage control and media management. But Grayson had moved beyond caring about corporate reputation or social standing. "But my son isn't a problem to be solved. He's a miracle I almost missed because I was too proud to admit I was wrong." He looked at Naomi, seeing past her careful composure to the woman who had carried this burden alone for 2 years. "His mother isn't an obstacle to be overcome. She's the strongest person I've ever known, and she raised him to be kind, curious, and trusting despite having every reason to teach him that the world was cruel." Oliver had grown restless during the adult talking and wandered back to Naomi, who lifted him automatically while keeping her eyes on Grayson's face. "I accused her of manipulation when the only person being manipulative was me. I let fear and old wounds convince me that I needed to control this situation instead of being grateful for the chance to be part of it. His voice cracked slightly. I almost destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me because I couldn't believe I deserved it. The courtroom was absolutely silent now, even the court reporter's fingers still on her keys. So I'm withdrawing the petition, Grayson continued, and I'm asking this court to grant Mrs. Ellison full custody with whatever visitation rights she feels comfortable allowing, because being a father isn't about legal documents or DNA tests or who can provide the most expensive opportunities. It's about showing up every day in whatever way she'll let me and proving that love is more powerful than fear. Judge Patterson leaned back in her chair, studying the three people who had somehow transformed her courtroom into something that felt more like a sanctuary. Ms. Ellison, how do you respond to Mr. Whitmore's statement? Naomi was quiet for a long moment, Oliver playing with her necklace while she gathered her thoughts. When she spoke, her voice was steady but soft. 3 years ago, I fell in love with a man who showed me who he could be for one perfect night. Then I spent 2 years hating him for who he chose to be the next morning. She looked at Grayson, and he saw forgiveness beginning to bloom in her dark eyes. But watching him learn to be Oliver's father, seeing him choose love over fear, I think maybe both versions were real, and maybe the question isn't who he was, but who he's willing to become. Mama, Oliver said suddenly, loud enough for the whole courtroom to hear, Daddy, stay. The simple question hung in the air like a prayer. Naomi looked at her son, then at Grayson, then at the future they might build together if they were brave enough to try. Yes, baby, she said finally. Daddy stays. 6 months later, on a sunny Saturday in May, they were back at the playground in Laurelhurst Park. But this time, Grayson wasn't a nervous visitor trying to win approval. He was a father pushing his son on the swings, while Naomi watched from their picnic blanket, her hand resting on the small swell of her belly where their second child was growing. Higher, Daddy! Higher! Oliver shrieked with delight, his dark hair flying in the breeze. Hold on tight, buddy, Grayson called back, and Naomi heard in his voice the complete transformation from the man who had once seen fatherhood as a burden to the one who now saw it as his greatest privilege. They'd been married in February, a small ceremony in Isabella's backyard with Oliver as the ring-bearer and Margaret Whitmore conspicuously absent. But Vivian's schemes had crumbled when her lies were exposed. And slowly, carefully, they'd built something real on the foundation of second chances and stubborn hope. As the afternoon sun painted everything golden, Oliver ran to her with a dandelion he'd picked. For baby, he announced solemnly, placing the flower on her stomach. Baby like flowers. Grayson settled beside them on the blanket, pulling them both close. What did we do to deserve this? He whispered. Naomi leaned into his warmth, watching their son chase butterflies with fearless joy. We chose love over fear, she said simply. Every day, we choose love. And in the distance, storm clouds gathered over the mountains, promising rain by evening. But they were ready for it now, all of them, together. The end. If you were Naomi, could you forgive a man who rejected you while pregnant, called you a liar, and then showed up wanting to be a father when the truth came out? Or do you believe some wounds run too deep to heal, even when there's a child involved? Tell us, can true love really overcome past betrayal and humiliation? Your participation in our channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.